Hello there, everybody. Welcome back to Star Wars Lads for this week's live Q&A and news discussion. We did have some big news drop this week with the second release of a Skeleton Crew trailer. Definitely happened earlier than I think most of us were expecting, especially, coming literally a day after Agatha ended. So they were really ready to get the marketing ramped up for Skeleton Crew. But we did drop a trailer reaction. I did that one alone, and then Sanak sent me in a summary of his thoughts. So we're going to re-go over kind of our reactions here now that we're together for you all. And then we're going to talk about some of the details that were released about Skeleton Crew. Outlaws once again coming back into conversation as Ubisoft pledges to release a big update that will fix a lot of the mechanics that people had problems with. Is it little too late? We'll see. We also have the announcement, or not really announcement, but the discovery of a new High Republic Audible original short little novella like we got with Padawan's Pride a few weeks ago. It is coming out next week, it looks like. So that's pretty exciting. We're going to talk about that as well. So stay tuned throughout the stream for all of those topics. Of course, as always, this is a live Q&A first and foremost. So we want to hear your guys' thoughts on not just the topics, but about anything you'd like. Obviously, there is a big elephant in the room tonight. It is election night here in the United States, if you are watching in the United States. And as some people already said in the chat, we are going to keep this politics free as much as we possibly can. This is your little escape for the next hour and a half to 2 hours from the election, and just to focus here on talking about the thing that makes all of us usually happy, and that is Star Wars. And we have a lot to look forward to when it comes to the world of Star Wars. So we're going to focus on Star Wars. Well, anything else you want to discuss too in the worlds of pop culture or movies. We've had some great discussions over the last few weeks about non-Star Wars related movie and TV topics, comics. We do have some questions in the chat already about comics, stuff like that. So anything you'd like to discuss in those areas, send them in to the chat. And without further ado, let's get to the main topic, which of course was the release of the second Skeleton Crew trailer. Technically, the first full trailer. The first trailer that we got back in August is a teaser trailer. So this is kind of trailer one slash trailer two. But in this trailer, we got more of the vibe of what this show is about, more looks at all the different locales and the different aliens that are all going to be a part of this entire thing. Heard some lines from the different kids that are going to be leading this production, and just overall, a lot of really cool, fascinating looks at the world that's going to be built around this show. I'm going to pass it to you first here, Stunnick, because you didn't get to give your full thoughts yet. What were your thoughts on the Skeleton Crew trailer? And is there anything in particular from there that you were really excited to talk about? I can't hear you. I don't know if it's just me.
Oh, sorry about that, guys. I kept myself muted there. But hopefully you guys can hear me now. But yeah,
I can
no,
hear you
I
now.
was I was mostly excited just for the visual elements. I think I was really impressed by what this show has already shown off, right? I think we had an idea that this was gonna have a lot of creatures no matter what. Like this is a pirate, bounty hunter, edge of the galaxy. Everyone's gonna be like, it's gonna be a little bit more alien, a little bit more out there and compared to some of like the Disney Plusisms of Star Wars, where a planet that used to have a little bit more aliens and all that will kind of pull back on that, have a few more humans, and you're just like, I guess that's that hour, that minute of the day that just happened to have more, right? And that's kind of how you have to like head canon it away. So it was the same sort of thing here, but we got to see a lot more. And then suddenly I'm like, wait, are we seeing all the way down the ramp into a ship? Are we seeing a huge landing platform? Are we seeing a huge cantina? It really reminded me of like the excitement I felt when we first saw none other than the Book of Boba Fett episode 5 when we see Din Djarin back, and that
Mhm.
was just using the volume, and you can kind of tell it's like not on any sort of physical set other than maybe a few pieces here and there, but it felt so rich and big and expansive, and this feels like that, but a little bit more. I think there was some great cinematography. I think that's what really helped it shine, compared to some of the stuff that in some directors, you know, image of Star Wars, it's a little bit more of the documentary style, a little bit more standardized. medium long shots, very George Lucasian in that way. This doesn't seem like that's it seems like a series that's more kinetic, kind of going more the Irvin Kershner route of like trying to make things look stylish, make things look cool. And I felt that with this trailer. I thought that was really grand. And yeah, we don't get really much from Jude Law in this one. Like it is very limited on the John Nanawood stuff and like the force reveal of the last one, but it was cool. It was the depth of, like, just how big these locales and locations felt, like, how these kids, as small as they are, like, they are truly in a world that is just massive. It's not just, "Hey, like, they're small and then the world is kind of average." It all felt pretty big, and maybe they are cherry picking some of the best. I'm not gonna deny that, but, I'm, cautiously getting more and more excited. I'm pretty pleased with what I'm seeing here, so yeah, pretty pleased by that. The Major Tom cover in Hatise was unexpected, but I think that worked really well for me. And then I believe the StarWars.com article that came out like a few minutes after the trailer release officially confirmed that Neil is not an Ortolan. It's like a different
Yeah.
species. So that was kind of expected. I was thinking maybe they'd say like he's an Ortolan offshoot species or like some convergent species or something like that, but they're just like, nah, he's not. So I wonder if they're gonna expand on that or if they're just gonna let it be. Obviously, that design is playing off of like what we know and what we expect. So yeah, no, I'm pretty happy. I think this trailer really showed off how fast and exciting and Goonies like this can be, how 80s inspired, how Stranger Things inspired. I'm starting to get a little bit of, like, a darker government vibe, like, of surveillance and all that, very much like, Hawkins National Laboratory and Department of Energy, in especially season 1 and season 2 of Stranger Things, so, yeah, no, I think we're in for a series that has also something for the adults that, very much is gonna at least mirror Stranger Things season 1, which is, that was probably the best season for the adults by far, so I'm pretty excited to see how that merges here with the Star Wars formula and with these characters. Some people are saying it's going to be more connected than you even imagine to the Mandoverse. I hope so. Like, I love this to be something that can continue. I think it was shot a while back now, so the kids would definitely have to be aged up a little bit. But maybe they'll say this was happening during Mando season 1, and then season 2, if it happens, can be set during The Mandalorian and Grogu or something like that. Because again,
Yeah.
we can't stress this enough on this channel. There is no way Mando season 1 through 3 all takes place in the same year. We can say 2, maybe a little bit under 2 years or something, but it's not like within 6 months like Filoni and Favreau first try to claim. And then you can't say like, "Oh, Luke is training Grogu for like 2 years." No, like this is a great chance if they really come back to these kids and the setting and locale, and especially with the reality of them being older, to like finally start saying like this is the timeline. Now we're like 3 years into it, a little bit closer to where we are in the real world, where it has been 5 years since we saw Mando season 1.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be hopefully a big part of this show, the defining element of the show as we see all the different things that will crisscross from those other 3 shows into this, because I've always thought, and I still fully believe, that this isn't going to be a show that just fully exists on its own. They are going to shoehorn it into the rest of the Mandalorian stuff, if not just for continuity, also to get, a poster out on Disney's Instagram account 2 days later saying, "Look, it's Din Djarin, and he was in an episode for 5 minutes," like they did for Captain Rex in the Ahsoka show, or Anakin. All these different characters showing up across these shows. They're going to want to be able to release those. So I do expect crossover, and I think via the crossover we'll be able to just really figure out when this show takes place and how expansive it really is. But this trailer was just perfect, I think, for broader marketing. I think for a lot of Star Wars fans, I don't know if this is the type of trailer that fully gets everybody on board. I still fully think there's going to be Star Wars fatigue, acolyte fatigue. I think people are going to slowly come to this one. And that's not going to be a surprise. I think it's going to have great word of mouth. I think people are going to watch it who are interested. Those people who are already going to be interested, wanting to enjoy this show. Hopefully, we all enjoy it and we like it, and the word of mouth is positive, and everybody's coming to watch this unassuming show that just kind of randomly got announced. It's now here. It's coming out at the end of the year. It has those holiday vibes, like you were saying, and I think it's going to be that comfort show for Star Wars. I do. I think it's going to deliver on all of those things, and then hopefully it has that same like Andor style pickup where people don't tune into it because it doesn't sound that exciting. The people who actually do watch it
Yeah.
love it, and get those people who are on the fringes about watching it to really enjoy it. And I think this does a better job of marketing it more broadly, telling people, showing people not just with style and story, but with music, that this is a an 80s inspired, Stranger Things, Amblin-esque type product. And I think this trailer, more so than the first one, definitely gave you that. But just seeing the creatures, I mean, I said in the reaction, this is going to be a full showcase for the Lucasfilm art department. Like this is this is like their dream project, all the different aliens we're going to have, not just background characters, not just CGI characters, but full on animatronic costumes. We're having animatronic costumes going to be there in full force as main characters. This is going to be a huge project, and I just think I hope that it eventually finds that love, because I'm, not really predicting that it's going to have that off the bat in its first couple weeks. It might take till after Christmas, but after Christmas we'll have 3 or 4 episodes out. That's when I kind of expect this to fully get into swing. And I think what they've shown here is perfect for this time of year. It's perfect for this type of season. And hopefully this becomes that kind of family hit of the holidays, and people just really eat it up, because this does look really, really fun. Kind of like I've been saying since they announced it, this is not something I've really been that excited for. I'm interested always in every Star Wars project. This has kind of been that back burner one for me, and the more and more we see what it is, the more and more we see it commit to its style, commit to its tone, commit to its type of characters, and its cast of characters, the more interested I am, just kind of by the osmosis of the interest of the filmmakers. It just seems like people, the people around this product, are very, very, very excited about it. They're not trying to sell it too hard. They're just interested in giving us what they have, and enjoying explaining that. And we do have more details about that I'm going to read right now, coming from the one of the writers of the show, Chris Ford, who did an interview and was discussing a lot of the characters that are coming out in the show. And we already have seen all of them in the trailers. Mainly Wim, who's played by Robbie Cabot Conyers, who's going to be seemingly the main human character we have here. And Wim is going to be a character who's our starry-eyed dreamer, basically our Luke Skywalker of the show, the person who wants to get out and wants to discover the galaxy. He's going to be our main POV, it seems like, the one who's bogged down in, the world he's living on. He just wants to see what the galaxy is like, and you get that from the trailer for sure. Then you have the character of Fern, who's played by Ryan Kira Armstrong. She's the character who's talking to Wim in the first scene that you see in that second trailer. She is a really we wanted a kid, Chris Ford says, who's really smart and could play the good, sweet daughter of someone in the government, but also a tough rebel trying to stand up to bullies. Ryan has that intelligence and duality. She's a great actor and very thoughtful about her choices. So that's the character of Fern. And that kind of is a Leia type in a lot of ways. So right off the bat, you get a Leia and a Luke, even younger versions of both of those. Then you have Fern's friend KB, who's the kid with the visor on. KB is played by Kyriana, I think, Kyriana Craters, who's a little bit more reserved. And that character is quiet and thoughtful. They are kind of the introvert of the group, it seems. And then you, of course, have the standout for a lot of people so far. And like you mentioned, not an Ortolan, now confirmed, but it is Neil. And Neil is played by Robert Timothy Smith. And Neil is going to be the wild card of the group. He's can be sweet and shy, but also has a lot of other qualities and comedy to bring out in the cast. So that sounds like a really fun cast of characters. Some archetypes we have seen before in Star Wars. That's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, a lot of original trilogy, or just in general 80s and 70s inspired Star Wars stories, do always go back to those archetypes of the wide-eyed dreamer and the tough sidekick and the scoundrel and the funny guy. It's just basic kind of pop entertainment character tropes. And so I'm excited to see how those tropes play out into these characters and how they become different than the other characters we've seen with these same types of personalities. And I think the way they play off of Jude Law and the rest of the galaxy at large will be a big factor in that.
Yeah, and it's gonna be interesting no matter which direction they take this show. I mean, I think there is a need for this to kind of be a hit now after how Acolyte performed in the summer, but you can't change the story. You can't change what has been put out there, but I'm pretty confident in whatever direction to take it because they have a great crew of directors. They got Kogonada, who is one of my favorites. They've gotten the Daniels, right? They've gotten a pretty remarkable list of directors and a crew behind here. And I'm sure John Watts taking a bit of a break from the MCU, dropping the Fantastic Four film originally. Like I hope it's because he's put everything in heart and soul into this, and this should be really fun to see. And I do like the character descriptions. I'm very curious what they do with Jude Law's character, but I'm invested. I think that's something that was kind of the same feeling that I had coming into Andor. I'm like, seemed pretty cool. And then I remember when we were both sitting at Celebration, when we first heard the Andor theme for the first time, we're like, wait a second, like, are they cooking here? Like, is there something like that? And I'm not saying I thought I had some of that vibe from at least, like, the story implications of the Acolyte trailer.
Mhm.
I'm not saying I have anything like that here, but I think it's such a big swing to go for, like, a major Tom cover. It's such a big swing to just say, like, "Here's what we got, and we're not gonna tell you the story yet," even though we are in a position where you kinda need to push the story out at this point for a lot of people to get really back hooked in. But yeah, no, I'm excited. I think this is the right crew for something like this. It's low stakes relatively to the story, but it's kinda high stakes for where we are right now with the Mandoverse, with the state of Star Wars, and I
Mhm.
think this is gonna be refreshing. It'll be a nice piece. It doesn't have to become important. It may become important because of its success, and maybe it doesn't, and you're like, "You know what? This is something like it's a Hawkeye that I can come back to every winter," and
Yeah.
you're like, "That was fun. That was good," and I hope that that's at least the base level for this. We'll see if it improves from there.
Yeah, and I think that's an important part of the conversation. You can't ignore the real world stakes that are around basically just any Star Wars project
Yeah.
coming out now after kind of the last year and a half that we've had where it's either been underperforming projects or projects that have done well, like maybe Ahsoka, but not as well as they had hoped. Projects like Mandalorian season 3 that didn't get the reviews they were hoping for. Basically, since Andor, it's just been one thing after another that's either been not as critically successful as they had hoped, not as much viewership as they had hoped, or both. And so the Acolyte kind of being that finale where it's really did not do well with the majority of the fandom. It also had mixed critical reception, even if it was actually mixed positive critical reception, and then also had the viewership poor viewership totals. I think that there's obviously a lot of real world implications on the success of Skeleton Crew, but I don't think no matter what the viewership is here, unless it's abysmal and just completely bombs, like nobody watches it, unless that happens, I think Disney and Lucasfilm will probably have a pretty low expectation, a pretty low bar for this show to hit in terms of viewership. I think what would be considered a success for them is that it continues to improve week by week. That if it starts out well in its first 2 episodes, maybe it can go down for like a third episode. And I was doing the math today. One of the interesting things about release for this show is if we do have an episode every Tuesday, that means there will be an episode on Christmas Eve and New Year's Eve, which would you would imagine be days that aren't great for viewership for a streaming program, especially New Year's Eve, because it just a lot of people go out that day. So I wonder if we will get some delays. I wouldn't imagine they would do two delayed episodes, maybe one. I could see him doing Christmas Eve and then delaying the New Year's Eve release, especially because we have a 2 episode premiere. But regardless, I think they would be pretty happy if by the time we get halfway through this show, episode 5-ish, you're seeing a slight uptick in viewership, and by the time you get to the finale, if the viewership is, let's say, you know, a little bit higher than the premiere, I think they would be pretty happy as long as it stays going up and the critical reception is there. I think this is one that's going to kind of live and die by the critical reception and the fan reception. If the fans are just like, whatever, then, this might be a dead show walking, unless the critic reception is like, incredible, like 100% on Rotten Tomatoes, top tier Star Wars show. But if the fans who actually watch it are just underwhelmed, I don't know if the show continues. If the fans love it, even if the critics are like mixed, let's say it's like a 7 out of 10 or a 6 out of 10, but the fans there's a big fan support. I do think the show is one they would take a risk on for a second season. You have a young cast, probably very inexpensive cast, so a lot of the money is going into the budget around costumes and effects. This would be your chance to really go in on a possibly lower budget show, a show that could be carried by a completely different cast of characters than the ones that will be moving to the big screen with The Mandalorian, but while also still being able to connect to that side. So I think there's a lot of really interesting revenue sources here and avenues for them to take this show and this product. But we'll see it. I mean, it all depends, obviously, more than ever after getting our first cancellation for a Disney Plus Marvel or Star Wars show. This really all is the more than ever relying on the combination of critical success, fan success, and viewership numbers. It's got to hit, I think, two of those three to continue. So we'll see how it goes. But yeah, that's the Skeleton Crew trailer and some of the information we found out about Skeleton Crew. What do you guys think? We do have some people in the chat talking about it, but let us know your thoughts for everybody who's joined. You can let us know your thoughts on Skeleton Crew in the comments. We just discussed that whole story for those of you who are just joining. Let's get into some of those comments here, starting with the Skeleton Crew comments. Let's see what we have here. We have Skywalker's Academy who asked, "Did you guys catch the ship that looks like Hondo's in the trailer?"
Yeah, yeah.
That's a good one. I didn't catch it when I first watched it, obviously, and then I heard people talking about it and went back and looked for it. And yeah, there is a really cool Easter egg that looks like it could be related to the Hondo ship from Smuggler's Run, the Katuni. And I really hope he's in it. I think he's one of the best bets for a character who is from, the pre original trilogy part of the Star Wars timeline that could be in this. Obviously, when you're dealing with pirates, there is not a more famous pirate in Star Wars than Hondo Ohnaka. I would love to see Batu as well if there's some type of like early connection to maybe him starting Ohnaka Transport Solutions in
Yeah.
from Galaxy's Edge on Batu. It'd be awesome to see Batu for even just a scene. I think that would just elevate it so much higher in the world of Star Wars. The kind of the zeitgeist around Star Wars land in general, because there's always been that conversation on should they have just made a planet that we were all familiar with, or should they have gone with the kind of LARPing elements they originally discussed. So it would be really cool if you got to see Batu at some point in one of these shows. But yeah, if Hondo was in this show, that would be really, really awesome.
Yeah, I mean, it is pretty interesting that we've kind of already seen that design without the red stripe in some other shows. I think someone mentioned it was also in the whole Resistance finale of The Rise of Skywalker. So it's been a model that they've had for a while, right? I think also on that planet where you can see almost it has like those hot tide pools, kind of a little snowy and all that, and then have some X-wing flying over. You can see like one of the tri-wings from the Obi-Wan Kenobi show. So yeah, I mean, it looks like they're gonna just this is a good show to reuse your assets for to just like flesh out some of the more wider shots for sure. So is this necessarily Hondo's chance to come into the story? I don't know, but I would say yes. I would love that, even if it's not a big moment for him. Just to like be able to use the animatronic that we have from Galaxy's Edge. It's really
Mhm.
quite there almost. You just have to modify it, use a little bit of CGI or something, and it's there. So I think people would really definitely enjoy that. Are we gonna see some? kind of connection and bridging between that and where he is in Rebels, and then what happened after Rebels. Sorry, after the Clone Wars, leading into. I don't think we'll get those details. I think we'll just get sort of like a Lando in Rebel situation where it's another part of his life, and in this case, it just happens to be like the start of something that's been a little bit more outlined in comics and stuff around Galaxy's Edge.
Yeah, and I really would love to see it. People forget too they have done live action for Hondo in the Smuggler's Run ride because they have the like pre video right before you get on the Millennium Falcon. That's a actor in a costume. It's not the animatronic as well. So it's like they've done the costume before. It's not probably movie ready, but they have done it, and they have obviously covered it with the Jim Cummings voice. So they've done that. They've prepped it. They've tried it. We'll see if they ever bring that to a show because I think Hondo would be that perfect type of character for these kids to eventually run into, and he kind of presents himself as that friend at first, and he does have a lot of friendly qualities, but ultimately he's trying to get something from them. Maybe they
Yeah.
find an item that he wants, and they needed a way off the planet, and he accepts them on there. And that would be the type of character, like I was talking about earlier. They make a poster for him, they put it out on social media, and people are like, Hondo's in this show, maybe I got to check it out now. Like, he's popular enough to get some eyeballs just from the fact that he's in the show. So I think that would be a great option. I don't think the ship necessarily confirms that he's in the show, but I think he was already an incredibly likely person to be in this show if you're looking at past Star Wars characters. And by the way, I will have a video out just like I do for every show talking about all the characters I think could be in the show at some point here in the next month. He's already a very likely character to be in it. I don't think this makes it more or less likely, but it is cool to at least know that there is a bit of a possibility from just actual material in this trailer that could hint at him, besides just rampant speculation. So they're very cool. Thanks for bringing that up. And that looks like all of the comments about Skeleton Crew so far. So we're going to move on to some of the comments here at the top, and then we're going to get to our other stories as we run through them. Again, this is a live Q&A for those of you just joining us. So you're welcome to send in a chat about anything you would like. It could be Star Wars related. It could be not Star Wars related. We do ask you refrain from talking about the election specifically because that is happening today. Other than that, you can ask us anything you want about Star Wars or any other pop culture stuff you'd like to discuss. We had some discussions about music last week, all sorts of fun stuff, sports, anything you would like to discuss. So we will start here at the top. We've got Skywalker's Academy who says, hello there, Skywalker's Academy. Critical Thinker says, I read the first book in the Dark Nest trilogy. It was really, really weird, but I didn't hate it. Characterizations of the Sky Solos, except Jason, were really good, which made up for some of the flaws, though the retcons to the Unifying Force concept seem incongruous with that theory was described in New Jedi Order. Also, what happens to one of the young Jedi Knights characters is so unnecessarily depressing. Yeah, and it continues to get more depressing throughout the remaining EU stuff that you have to read. But yeah, I'm glad you're enjoying it so far. Hopefully you continue to enjoy the trilogy as you get through the last two books. You really fly through these books, Critical Thinker. I'm impressed with your reading speed. It seems like every week you have finished another one. I'm very impressed with your speed. But yeah, glad you're enjoying that. Critical Thinker says, also, I read the Bloodline novel. Not sure. I assume you mean the one by Claudia Gray, right? Not the one part of
Not
Legacy of the Force.
Bloodlines. Yeah.
Yeah. Not sure how I feel about it yet. Some of the politics and world building was interesting. Bale conveniently leaving a message. Okay, you are talking about Bloodline. Bale conveniently leaving a message around was kind of dumb. Yeah, well, I'm glad you liked it. I love Bloodline. That is one of my favorite Star Wars books ever. Probably still my favorite of canon. I think the politics is excellent and the world building was excellent. Also, it definitely does deserve a reread from me. I don't know how it would change my perception overall with it. I think I would still really enjoy and appreciate the world around it. But keep in mind when we read it back in, I think it was 2016,
Yeah.
Um, there was basically nothing around the sequels yet. So it was all speculation about what's moving forward. And to have some initial world building around the First Order and the New Republic and the Resistance and the lead up to the Force Awakens. I mean, we're coming right off the Force Awakens at this time too. It just felt like a perfect magical addition. I'm sure it is a little hampered now by the fact that it's kind of the only thing we have around that time besides the Resistance show. But you know, I appreciate your perspective, even if I would disagree that I do really, really enjoy that book.
Yeah, I mean, I'm still a fan of it. Of course, I mentioned it quite a few times. I love how we kind of get these fan casts of the
Hmm.
characters too, which I think really helps. Claudia Gray kind of has a vision for which actors and actresses that she really thinks could portray them. So Roman Casterfo being Tom Hiddleston, it's not something
Yeah,
I don't think would have worked until she said it, and then I was like, oh my god, yeah, yeah, that's exactly who he is. That's exactly who I'd expect and want from this. He's got kind of the smarminess, but that's still genuine, and he's almost been, like, grown up in a lot of, like, propaganda, but he also understands, like, "No, this is New Republic. This is, what we're still fighting for." He's a very complicated character with a lot of twists, and it's a bit of a shame that we haven't returned to him yet. I think he's got a lot of potential to fill out some stuff leading into stuff happening during the sequel trilogy. Maybe he's probably more than likely stuff afterwards, like when he's freed as like a political prisoner and stuff like that. So,
yeah,
I'm really excited to see what his future holds. And if they can pull a Tom Hiddleston, I mean, that instantly makes him like top tier Star Wars character. I don't think that happens, right? I think, I forget the name of the princess in Master and Apprentice, but she's supposed to be Sadie Sink, but
yeah.
Sadie Sink is also much older now than when that book was first written. So probably if you ever saw that on screen, it wouldn't be anything more than animation because there's just no way of like having Sadie Sink play a 12-year-old self again, right? So, but a Tom Hiddleston, I think you can definitely play with that, especially with the timeline being 5 years before. Um, I do think that some of the Maxine Warrior stuff and Proto First Order stuff, and then, the loose connections being made to Han, Luke, and Ben, and with the revelations and everything, that probably didn't sit as well as I expected when I first read it, but I still thought it was really good. I think that might have gotten a little softer now, just because I want to see more of that story. So much time has passed, and I think I was expecting a little bit more pretty quickly after that. But we'll see. I still do think that is top 3 canon book for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I would definitely agree. Critical Thinker did clarify that they have read some of these books earlier and just bring them up each stream.
Right.
But and that makes a little more sense. I didn't want to say that. I didn't want to say that because you the way you've presented it, it does sound like you're reading them every week. But I was going to be like, man, I'm really shocked how fast you're blowing through these, especially because none of these really have audiobooks. So if you were even like an audiobook person who listened like at 3 times speed or something, uh, you couldn't even do that for all the New Jedi Order and Dark Nest and all of that. So yeah, thanks for clarifying that.
Yeah.
Skywalker's Academy says it's been a long, long time since I read Bloodline. Thought it was pretty good overall. And then it says only 28 days until Skeleton Crew 2 episode premiere. Yeah, that is another exciting part we didn't really talk about when we were talking about Skeleton Crew. Having that 2 episode premiere, it just seems like that's becoming a standard now for Disney Plus. We got 2 episode premiere for Agatha. We got 2 episode premiere for Ahsoka. I'm trying to think what else. I know Bad Batch also, I believe, was 2 episode premiere. So it
Yeah.
just seems like in general, every time we get a new show, it's going to be a 2 episode premiere. And I think that's smart. Amazon usually does their 3 episode premieres. I think the 2 episode premieres, especially when they're shorter. Oh, Acolyte as well, 2 episode premiere. Especially when they're shorter episodes, like Disney Plus is more accustomed to giving us, like the 35 to 40-minute range. Hoping Skeleton Crew is a little longer. But if they're in that range, I do think giving us a full hour to an hour and a half of TV is certainly a better way to get people locked in and invested in the story right off the bat than just giving them 30 minutes and then they're watching it and like, maybe I'll check it out again. Um, at least if you get people locked in, they're more likely to watch every week versus if they're not that interested, they might just wait and binge it all if people say it's good. So I think it's a smart
Yeah.
strategy, and I'm glad they're continuing that with Skeleton Crew.
Yeah, I mean, I do miss having longer windows, and that really would have come with the fact that we used to have 10 episodes as a standard when HBO and Netflix were kind of leading the way. I know
Yeah,
Netflix has a lot of 8 episode, 9 episode series, even from 2014, 15, like Stranger Things, like House of Cards, stuff like that. But it just felt like that was them being the ones cutting back a little bit instead of being the standard, right? Because you're like, "Oh, no,
mhm,
HBO has so many resources, has a lot of sets and costumes and stuff that they can reuse. They're a little bit more grounded, a little more focused on drama, like the prestige era of AMC." And then you kinda look at it how it's actually played out, and you're like, "Oh, man, like, that's just because everyone's just throwing so much money into it without it actually being viable quite yet as a format." Like, everyone kinda just had to when we're all at home because of COVID and all that, so yeah, it is a bit of a situation where I get it. It makes sense for getting people excited and invested. It doesn't force your first episode to be like, I'm dropping a nuclear bomb at the very end of like a reveal. Not
yeah,
everyone can land what Game of Thrones does, for example, in its very first episode with that shocking twist and end there, right? But not every story should be doing that, right? So I think it is one of those situations where I'm like, okay, I understand it. I just hope that we find a nice healthy balance because there's just too many shows that are 6 episodes and mini series drops that are like 4 episodes. And I'm like, why? Like at this point, just make it a movie. And that is what they're doing. A lot of shows
yeah,
like a Moana was turned into Moana 2, even though the animation might not look as good as the first. They're like, well, it's gonna definitely be more enjoyed in this format, probably stronger this way too. So yeah, I hope that we find a new healthy balance and that the shows that are made aren't just like stretched out movies. We get to continue having stuff like WandaVision and Agatha that feel weekly on Disney Plus. Like, hey, this is what we're exploring, and it's going to be different each episode. It gives you a little tease of what could come next with the ongoing story, but it's an episode of TV that you can tune into, and then if you miss
yeah,
something, kind of go back and really flesh out the details. And it's not a lost art. It's just been a very specific choice for some reason. So
yeah.
yeah, no, I'm excited for the future. I'm excited for this 2 episode premiere. I just mourn having a little bit longer windows.
Yeah, and those are all fair points. Like I think, you look back at Mandalorian, right? Season 1, first episode ends with him discovering Grogu. So you're like, "Oh, okay, a baby Yoda. What's this going to lead to?" And then season 2, I think the first episode ends with Boba Fett. So you have those kind of cliffhangers, and really when I think about it, I can't really think of any of these shows recently, even including Book of Boba Fett, which did only have a one episode premiere. I can't think of any of them having that type of cliffhanger, whether it be Ahsoka. I mean, I guess Sabine getting stabbed in Ahsoka episode 1, maybe. Um, but Andor doesn't really have a major cliffhanger in the first episode. Acolyte doesn't have a major cliffhanger in the first episode, so it's just kind of, yeah, nothing to that level. So it is something that doesn't seem to be part of their trajectory with storytelling. And if you need to search for a way to get people hooked, two episode premiere certainly gets them, at least with the time investment, much more committed than a one episode premiere. Scrolling back into the chat here, we have Critical Thinker says, "Do you think they can fix Din Djarin's character arc after Mandalorian season 3, since his whole conflict with his cult and fighting his indoctrination was botched there? If so, how?" Well, I don't know if they're going to go back to that storyline, really. I think by the time you see Mandalorian season 3 end, the Mandalorians are basically united. All the different factions of the Mandalorians are united. That's what a lot of Mandalorian season 3 was about. I don't think they handled it that well, especially the passing of the torch from Din Djarin to Bo Katan. I think a lot of that stuff deserved a bit stronger storytelling. Um, but I don't think they're going back to it. As I've said a bunch of times, I think Mandalorian and Grogu is a reset. I think we're basically starting from the basics. It's like, what do people know about the Mandalorian who've never watched an episode, right? You have the Mandalorian and you have Baby Yoda. and they're a team and they do stuff. Like that's what your grandpa might say about the Mandalorian is they recognize that image of Mandalorian and Grogu, and that's it. And I think ultimately this movie is going to be just a complete reset. I think it's going to just be an adventure about them, kind of reintroduce the stakes, reintroduce the Imperial Remnant, reintroduce what they're fighting for and what they're fighting against. I hope and imagine a lot of those characters, like the Armorer, like Bo Katan, they'll be a part of it. I hope references to what has happened will be a part of it, but I don't think they're going to retell or retrudge down the same plot lines they were trying to focus on for season 2 and season 3. I think that's all but over. I do expect, though, at some point him to remove his helmet because then we're going to see the movie star that they're going to put as the head name on the poster, and that's Pedro Pascal. We're going to see his face at some point. I would be shocked if we don't. So they might go back down the plot line of revisiting the idea that he isn't comfortable taking off his helmet, but I don't imagine it being kind of the crux of the emotional part of the story as it was in season 1 and season 2, um, in the Mandalorian movie.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to not say that his arc is a bit stagnant at best, right? It it does. As much as I wanna be like, "No, no, is it like" no, it absolutely does stagnate. It's just a fact. But I think it's not something that's, like, completely thrown away, and I don't think we should look at Mandalorians as, like, similar to real world at all times. They're definitely inspired by different groups and all that, but maybe they'll be able to play off a little bit more of the cultish indoctrination that we're like, he's gonna throw away and cast off, and be like, well, there is a chunk of that can be reworked and reframed, and it can be a little bit about him kind of going to a bit of a safe space, something a little bit comforting for him while he's kind of going on this mission, this sacred pilgrimage. He's casting literally the armor, wearing the visage of someone who is truly benevolent, truly trying to do right by his creed, by his religion, right? And yeah, I mean, Bo-Katan comes in and she's the one who doesn't believe, and then she gets turned a little bit, but she still kind of gets wins over the armor anyway. She's like, yeah, you get to walk both worlds. So it's not saying that like, this is it, like this is what it's gonna be for his character. No, I do think the work is cut out for them a bit, no matter what, because simple fact, like you're saying, Liam, that we didn't get Pedro. We can more than likely get him for the Mandalorian Grogu. He's been apparently bouncing between both of the sets, and already there were some rumors of time sensitive shoots happening, right? But yeah, yeah, no, I mean, it does feel very remarkably possible that yeah, Din Djarin is gonna have a lot of key pivotal scenes, more than we've seen in the first 2 seasons combined, and we'll get some real, like, explanation about his headspace, his choices being made, other people and, this is a great chance, like we were hoping, much, much earlier on, to get Fen Rao into this story, right? Fen
Mhm.
Rao is someone who can kind of play a little bit of the historian, kinda give a little bit of, like, precedence for, like, what he's done, like, you're not the only one who's had, like, not necessarily stumbles, but, like, steps away to something a little bit more safer until you realize, "No, I have to take a bit more of a braver leap," right? So I think we can get a lot done here. I think a movie is definitely the perfect format for it because I think a TV show, then you'd have to spend episodes and episodes in that, and I don't think that's the point of The Mandalorian as a TV show, even though it is more intimate, sure, but it won't necessarily hit the same as a good, like, 10 minutes of his mask off, and you don't even have to have him masked off talking to other Mandalorians. It can just be on his own, in his own private quarters, communicating somehow with Grogu or, like, kinda going over the events of the first 3 seasons and stuff like that. There's so many ways for his arc in season 3 to be laid out, and then I was looking back and be like, the pieces were there, right? I think one thing that I'd like to compare it to is, like, in The Last Jedi to The Rise of Skywalker, people are like, "What do you mean Hux was, like, the spy?" Like, it's not a great story choice. I agree with that, but I think people have been noticing a little bit more at, like, when he's first walks into the Last Jedi sequence where Kylo and Rey have been blown back by the separation of the breaking of the lightsaber, the Luke Skywalker lightsaber, that, like, Hux is ready to assassinate Kylo, right? He does not care. He's like, "I finally got rid of my opponent, my person who's been a thorn in my side," and that's how they both kind of view each other. So, for him to make that turn to the spy, while I will never love it, it becomes very apparent that it was always kinda selfish, especially with time gone on. There are some elements that do just show up, right? And I think whatever happens here with the Mandalorian Grogu, Favreau is much more competent with filmmaking. That is his bread and butter. He loves to push the technology, and he always gets a strong story, even if it's not groundbreaking. And I think we'll see at least the character motivations and everything really see through. He's already, in my mind, gone through that Iron Man 2 sort of situation where he threw some ideas at the wall and it didn't really work, right? That's what I look at Book of Boba Fett, Mando season 3. Now that they've had to readjust, recalibrate, sure, he was never in that situation of coming back and doing it himself, but he was definitely around the MCU when they did that. He was around Shane Black when Iron Man 3 was happening, just as like an advisory role and all that. I think we're going to see him actually get a chance to really make things right, or at least a lot more clear and a lot more understandable, and then set us up for maybe a Mandalorian and Grogu 2, or at least the New Republic finale film.
Yeah, I don't put it past them to revisit some of these plot lines in the future. I just don't think it's going to be this movie. Like, I think this movie is going to be as stripped down, audience friendly as possible. I think it really is going to try to avoid heavy-handed exposition dumps. It's going to be trying to avoid the things that will get pull people who are fans of the show out and pull people who are not fans of the show in. And one of the things I would think would prevent people who are not fans of the show from jumping on board is if they are sitting there listening to all this exposition, or trying to explain things that happened in the past, and they feel like, uh-oh, I have no idea what they're talking about. What's going on? I'm out, which is kind of a complaint we have heard people say about Ahsoka. So I think, they're going to try to avoid that. I think that's why I think it's going to be so fresh. Not that they can never go back to that. I think the dualism and the dual identities of Din Djarin is one of the most important parts of his character. And like you're saying, critical thinker, it is a shame that they didn't focus on that. I mean, I think you'll find very few people out there who don't think it was a mistake to bring Grogu back in the Book of Boba Fett. It really should have been one of the big plot lines of The Mandalorian season 3. The fact that he has this dual identity, that he has this part of him that he's only revealed to one being, basically, and that was Grogu. And that's like a gift that he gave this character, and all the things he's done to sacrifice his personal identity and his religious beliefs for his family, as we see throughout Mandalorian season 2. Those are just kind of ignored because let's bring Grogu back in Book of Boba Fett because we want him there in season 3. So I don't think you'll find anybody who doesn't agree that that's a disappointing plot point. And I agree it really should have been the focus of Mandalorian season 3. Kind of, and those dueling identities should have been the backbone of the Bo-Katan plot and the reunification of Mandalore. And we didn't do that. But I don't think that's going to be something they completely revisit in the first movie. I think if they hope to get a second movie, we could kind of go back to that as the symbol of Din Djarin versus the person of Din Djarin, and kind of retrudge some of those plot lines. But I don't think they're going, at the very least, I think they're going to try to avoid the plot lines from the shows as much as possible so that people who are new, who haven't experienced the shows, don't complain about the fact that why should they be expected to have watched 3 seasons of a show to enjoy this movie. I think they're going to try to get people in on this season. So I think I fully on this movie. So I fully expect this movie to be maybe bland for some people who have seen the show, but hopefully with a new enough storyline and an exciting enough storyline that if you have seen the show, you can get invested, even if it doesn't have all the references to what we have already seen in the show. But yeah, thanks for that question there. Next one is, what are your guys' thoughts on the Batman Nightfall saga? I have a very soft spot in my heart for Nightfall. Um, for me, so I was a big DC Comics fan. I have been my whole life, but especially when I was a kid, obviously, when I was growing up. The reason I'm a DC Comics fan more so than Marvel was because I grew up in the early 2000s. So we had Batman animated series from the 90s to watch. We had the Superman animated series. We had the Justice League show that was coming out when I was, an impressionable kid watching superhero TV shows. We had Justice League Unlimited shortly after that. Then we had the Batman show. We had all these shows that were just so incredible around DC. And with that, I read a lot of comics. One of the comics I did read a bit, but as a kid, you're kind of sporadically reading. You're not reading full arcs. You're not reading trade paperbacks. Weren't really that big in the early 2000s. It wasn't really a thing much until New 52 as much, and you're just kind of reading random things. Well, for me, then you get a little older, and the things you liked as a kid aren't as cool. But then we got the new wave of superhero movies, right? And that really kicked off with the Iron Man, I think, is when superhero movies really became cool. There was Batman Begins and The Dark Knight. Dark Knight the same year, and I really think 2008 is when superhero movies did elevate to that level of like everybody loved them. Before Spider-Man, X-Men, those things were all popular, but it still was kind of for the nerds. But other people, and they didn't embrace the fullness of the comics. They were kind of made for everybody else. If you loved comics, you were still kind of a nerd. I think 2008 to 2012, the time period between The Dark Knight and Avengers 1 is when the landscape completely transformed. And what else did we have come out in 2012? We had The Dark Knight Rises come out. And for me, as somebody who, fell in love with superheroes again in 2008 and obsessed over The Dark Knight, like watched it a million times, I could not wait for The Dark Knight Rises. And one of the things that got me back into comics was like, I'm so excited for The Dark Knight Rises. I want to read everything Batman. And what's the thing The Dark Knight Rises kind of based on with Bane? Nightfall. So that was the thing that really got me back into reading comics back in like 2008, 9, 10. And so I have a huge soft spot in my heart for Nightfall. And I actually do think Nightfall itself is really good. It's been a while since I've read it, so it might be more generic, cheesy 90s, and it is, but I think it avoids some of the pitfalls of more traditional 90s comics like you see from Death of Superman or from some of Marvel's Spider-Man stuff like Maximum Carnage and stuff like that. It's not fully for the art. It is a story that I think has quite a bit of substance to it. But then when they go off the rails is the rest of it. Night Quest, I really think is kind of dull. That's when Azrael's Batman. I do like nostalgically love the Azrael bat suit, but other than that, the story is pretty boring. But I thought Night's In is a pretty solid finale. It's not nearly as good as Nightfall, but it is a solid finale. And so yeah, those are my thoughts overall. The Nightfall saga. Sonic, I could pass it to you. I assume you're going to say you have no idea anything about Nightfall.
My impression of Nightfall is the contingency of the Arkham game, so that's
There
not
we go.
really
Yeah.
what's been talked about here. Um, yeah, I guess I'll defer.
Yeah, Critical Thinker says the early 2000s probably my favorite era of DC Comics. The books were really expensive or expansive and interconnected at that point, and there were some really cool events. Yeah, there were great events in the early 2000s. I can't say I necessarily remember reading them back then because I was very young, but I'm sure I read a few issues of them here and there. But then, I read them all when I got older. And then says Nightfall is one of the best Batman events. It does have some of the 90s cheese, especially in Night Quest, as you say, but it also has some really great dramatic moments and character development. Definitely agree. I think Night Quest would be better if it wasn't so overlong. Like it's so long just to basically extend the fact that Batman is defeated / killed just the same way they did with Death of Superman, which I think also Death of Superman is to me not close to as good as Nightfall. But at least, comparing the first part where Superman actually dies versus where Batman breaks his back, I don't think it's close to as good, but it does have that one issue when Superman gets killed by Doomsday that is actually really, really good. Like it's actually kind of tragic and heartbreaking. And then they have Funeral for a Friend and all that stuff that's actually a pretty good epilogue to it. And then you get the Reign of the Superman and you get all the different Superman stuff, and it's very 90s cheese. And then eventually you get Superman back, and it's just like, okay, at this point, it's way too long. And that's what Nightfall or Night Quest really was. It's like, okay, Azrael's Batman, great. He's darker, more violent. Nobody likes him. Commissioner Gordon hates him. Tim Drake hates him, and nobody likes him. And Bruce can't do anything about it. And now he's being mean to Bruce now. It's just all the stuff. It's very predictable storyline. And it's just kind of boring. Other than the art, it's boring. But I think if they would have shortened it, if it would have been like 5 or 6 issues instead of 20, I think it would have been a lot better. But yeah, I would agree overall with you. Critical Thinker says also, plus some of those villains in Night Quest look or like those cowboys, and the Tally Man were so goofy. I did like the bit of continuity where some of the characters in Nightfall were still wearing the Superman armbands. Yeah, there's some good callbacks. It is, like you said, probably the best Batman event. I can't really think of any other Batman events that are that expansive. But other than that, just if we're just talking about any Batman event, it probably is still my favorite. But it certainly tails off in the middle and then redeems itself a little bit at the end, but I don't think is enough to really carry. And like, still for most people, I would probably just recommend you read Nightfall, you skip Night Quest, or read just a few issues of it and kind of get the gist of what happens. And then you read Night's End, or you skip to the end of, you look up whichever issue Bruce comes back in, and then you read that part because it really isn't that compelling in the last 2/3, but the first part is great. Back to the comments here. We have Skywalker's Academy said, I had a girlfriend who was into Batman, so into Batman it drove me away from it. We should get back into it. It's certainly worth your time. I love Batman comics. Very biased. Is my favorite superhero, but you should definitely check it out. Critical Thinker says, favorite Timothy Zahn book besides OG Thrawn trilogy. That's a tough one. The thing with Zahn is pretty much everything he's written revolves around Thrawn. And then if you look at the 3 books that he's written for Star Wars that don't revolve around Thrawn, 2 of them revolve around Mara Jade, who is also one of his characters that is in pretty much everything that he has written in the EU. And then he has Scoundrels randomly. For me, it would be close between Thrawn Ascendancy, that whole trilogy, and Hand of Thrawn duology. I think I would give the edge to Ascendancy. I really do love Ascendancy. And if I had to pick a specific book, I think I would pick Lesser Evil. And that's a pretty big credit. We're actually planning on doing for our next tier list, unless the vote changes for our Patreon members and YouTube membership members, which, by the way, if you guys are interested, check that out. We're planning on doing Star Wars authors. And we did a Star Wars author tier list before, but we had kind of stricter limitations. We're planning on doing a canon authors one and then eventually a Legends authors one. And so talking about canon authors, I mean, you look at Zahn's Thrawn work, I mean, it's really 6 incredible books. And some of them are some of his finest books he's ever written. So it is a testament. It is a testament to the quality of his canon Thrawn books that even I would even say, or even consider Lesser Evil or some of the other Ascendancy books, or even just the unofficial Thrawn trilogy in canon amongst some of his best. But yeah, for me, it would probably be Ascendancy, Hand of Thrawn, Outbound Flight. I like the Mara duology quite a bit too, but I don't know if it's as good as those 3. It would probably be those 3. And then specifically the Thrawn and Thrawn Treason books of his unofficial Thrawn trilogy are also very, very good.
Yeah, I mean, I would just go Thrawn duology. That's just an easy layup there. I haven't read enough of Ascendancy to have a strong argument for it. I do like the first Thrawn book as well in canon. I think that is probably the nicest way of handling his transition from Chiss exile into, you know, the first real steps of becoming that Grand Admiral figure that we do see in Heir to the Empire and all that. So, yeah, I'm excited. I'm interested in seeing what the future holds for him in canon. If we do get a third trilogy from Zahn, that does like fill in that gap between what we know happens at the end of Rebels into Peridia and just before, or maybe a few years before the events of Ahsoka. But since we don't really have anything really for that time period other than the Legends equivalent, I do have to go with the Thrawn duology, even if he isn't actually in it. It's just the concept of him, what he's created, Empire of Hand. Oh, that's really cool. And I do like the idea of like all these three people kind of working to create the Thrawn Spectre. And then you realize, like, yeah, Thrawn was so incredibly capable, flawed as he may have been, but still incredibly capable that it takes three different people to handled it. Like it's kind of insane if you think about it. But when it is working, it kinda does work. I do think the Bothan kinda storyline is a little overlong, in those books, but that's about it. I mean, they're long books. It's Zahn kinda just force feeding us every little bit of information he wants and corrections, and who am I to say no?
Yeah, that is a great duology. That's one of my favorites. Certainly is essential amongst the Star Wars lore too. So really do appreciate that story. Let's get back to some of the other topics we haven't discussed here, as we are kind of running down through the chat. And again, everybody watching, this is a live Q&A. It is a chat. You guys can let us know anything you would like to discuss in the chat here, and we will get to it as soon as we can. Just send it in and we will answer it as soon as possible. But let's get to some of these other topics we did have. And that does go back to Star Wars Outlaws once again. It seems like we always, every week, have something to talk about with Outlaws. It's yet to be anything of note. But today we did get the kind of an update from Ubisoft saying that they're going to make big changes to the way Outlaws stealth and combat mechanics work in the next update. The first key area of improvement they say is to the game is combat, where we see a real opportunity to add more depth and excitement to the experience, further rewarding your tactics and precision. Our second key area is stealth, which is not only about improving the readability and consistency of enemy detection, but also providing choice in how you want to approach each encounter. Finally, our third key area of focus is centered around the character controls, which means improving the reliability of cover, increasing the responsiveness of climbing and crouching, and generally improving the consistency of the controls overall. So that is actually pretty big news. I mean, for those people that still do care about Outlaws. I would be lying if I said I have touched Outlaws since early September when I finished it. I'd never 100% completed the game. I didn't really have much desire to go back. I spent maybe, I want to say, 5 or 6 hours after the story wrapped up, doing some things here and there, completing some quests I had started, but not enough to really keep me going in that game, especially as other things started coming into my life that were uh, going to take up a lot of my time. Outlaws certainly fell out. And I'm not somebody who bought access to the DLC that's coming, so I'm really not sure if I'm going to do that as of now. I'm not really planning on getting it. I'd kind of wait until maybe there's a big sale next year, or if they do a sale on Black Friday, we'll see. But I don't really have much desire to go back to the game. There's not too much from the game that really excites me about going back, unless I hear that somehow these DLC packs are absolutely amazing and just change the experience top to bottom. But it is interesting to know that they at least kind of take into account all the major criticisms about the game. Obviously, they're not taking into account the one of the big criticisms about the open world and the way you're given a lot of extra content to do outside of the story and post game. There's still that lack of those elements, and I wonder, depending on the sales of the DLC, if they would even consider maybe dropping some of those DLC stories for free, or maybe giving people a 5-day trial or something of the stories, just to try to get people back into the game. Because to do a big update like this, they really do think they can win people back over, or at least get people on board with trying it out. Now, what I've always said too, as well, is that Ubisoft every year does a huge Black Friday sale. Like, they drop their prices on their stuff 50% or more every year. And I'm expecting that for Outlaws. So maybe their hope is we have the DLC, the first DLC coming out November 21st. It's right before Black Friday, a week before Black Friday. We have Black Friday where the game might get cut in half in its price for a few days. Maybe we get a boost between Black Friday and Christmas where a lot of people start playing this game who did ignore it because of the initial reviews and are actually impressed by the product because we've revamped the controls, we've revamped the combat, we've revamped the stealth mechanics that people were complaining about. That to me is the only reason to do this because I think for the most part the player base is gone. I don't really hear anybody talking about Outlaws anymore. So other than that, seems like a waste of time to do all this stuff. But I do think they're hoping and banking on the fact that DLC and Black Friday sales will boost the player base again for this game, and at the very least, make those people who haven't played the game and don't have a bad impression of the game enjoy the experience that much more to the point where they're willing to invest into the DLC. So that's why I think they are doing this. But Sonic, when you hear the news that they're making the combat better, they're improving the stealth, they're improving the way the game functions with the way you can crouch. I mean, like I said before, I had a time where I was crouching behind a rock and got stuck inside and had to quit the game to get out of it. There's just a lot of things around cover based mechanics and shooting and combat in this game that just didn't work very well. When you hear all these things, you think it's a little too late? Are you excited they're improving this stuff? What are your thoughts?
I mean, it's not gonna be an incredible game no matter what, but I can't say I'm not excited for Wildcard DLC. I'm not ex Can't say I'm not excited for the Honda DLC that's gonna come afterwards. If these little things and changes happen that really do strengthen the game as a whole, I mean, that's the best that thing that can happen. Like 100%. Like, why would I ever look at this game and be like, "Oh, I don't want it to be updated. I don't want these changes and fixes to happen." Like, I never had that bug like you did, but, I had a couple things where I was like, "Oh, man, this is annoying. Like, why am I getting instant stealth detected?" Like, that was one of the first things that they fixed. They're like, yeah, especially in those first couple missions, people are, like, completely blowing, like, instantly the stealth safety rating and that we originally established, and I'm like, "Yeah, yeah, that sounds about right," and then they changed it and seemed like it got better, that's what people were saying. I don't think this game is gonna get anywhere past a 6.5, 7 for some people, but for the people who were looking at it as, like, a 7 out of 10, I think these small quality of life things will really help it pick up at least a decent player base for the winter season, kinda push up to more of a 7.5. I think those DLCs, if they are as story heavy as I hope they are, I think those will really, really at least carry, like, the complaint of, like, "Is there really enough narrative to justify this game?" We'll never make the price work out. I think that's just a fact. But I think we will be able to flip things around and be like, yeah, at the end of the day, once these both these DLCs are out, once all the quality of life changes and modifications have been made as necessary for your play style, for just general game mechanics, I think people will be happier. I really do. So maybe it's a little too late, but I don't know, man. Like in the gaming industry, so many AAA games kind of get revitalized 2 years later. Like No Man's Sky is one of the greatest examples of that. Dead in the water for like
Yeah.
almost nearly 2 years, and people are like, "Why are we even still doing these small little changes and changes?" And now people look at it as one of the most revered examples of like fixing game. We have Battlefront 2 as a great example until they stopped support for, unfortunately, the Battlefield game that came out that year, but people loved it. In 2020, the game was popping off like crazy, so, yeah, no, I truly do believe that the game will become better. How much better? I don't know, but it'll be something that maybe in a year or 2 we'll look back and be like, "No, it turned into something pretty fun," especially when you put all of it together and you get, like, a half off sale like you do for basically every Ubisoft game.
Those are all fair points. I think the biggest obvious difference between No Man's Sky and Battlefront 2 and Outlaws is they're multiplayer based games, or at least in No Man's Sky's uh, case, it's supposed to be an endless game. It's a game that you just can keep doing and exploring no matter what. It never has an end to it. And I think the thing with Outlaws is I'll never diss a studio for adding improvements, even if I think it is a little too late at this point. I'll never diss them for adding improvements because, hopefully go back to this game in a year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, whenever a sequel might get announced or whatever, and it's that much better than you remember. Great. But it is now we're going on 2 months, over 2 months since the game came out. Where were these, big improvements when the player base was calling for them? It really just, to me, the cynical side of me that, knows the gaming industry's more, how should we say it, financially motivated tendencies, just really sees this as a way for them to be like, okay, our DLC sales right now, pre-orders around DLC are awful. How do we boost this? Our only way is to really target new gamers. Let's try to target the newer gamers that are going to be buying this for half price. We're going to have to bite the bullet on the price of Black Friday sales, and we're going to have to bite the bullet on sales overall. But hopefully we can make money on the back end via DLC. Hopefully we can get enough word of mouth out there in a second push for this game that we get a sequel. To me, that's their strategy. And I don't think it's necessarily a bad strategy. And if, hey, half the player base or a quarter of the player base joins this winter and are like, wow, this game is so much better than I thought, then awesome. If that leads to a second game, I'm not opposed to a second game. I would like to see a second game with all these improvements. But I don't necessarily buy the fact that this is going to revitalize the game the way Battlefront and stuff was revitalized. But on them, they are giving us free updates, free things. Free anything is good, especially in the world of video games. They are giving us free updates that should make the game hypothetically better. But yeah, and it's also always good when you see a big corporation acknowledging the flaws of things when they don't try to double, triple down on the fact that their product is flawed, when they don't try to convince you, no, you were wrong. Our product's good. What are you talking about? Here they're acknowledging, okay, yeah, the combat's not as good as it could be. Stealth isn't quite as good as it could be. What I'm really interested though in overall is this just tightening controls? Is this just making like the aiming reticle a little bigger? Is this just making K a little bit more magnetic to crouching and cover? Or do they actually add things to the game? Like, do they add stuff to the combat where like one of the big complaints was when you climb things or jump and you have a gun, she drops it instantly. Like, do they get rid of that so that you could climb a ladder and keep your gun? Those types of little things that they could improve. Do they fix those or do they just tighten things? I think that's really the key overall on what we're going to see here in the future. But at least they're still working on it. They're not giving up on it. And that does bode a little bit better, in my opinion, for a possible sequel, because this isn't, a complete failure to the point where they're like, okay, let's just never talk about this again. They're at least concerned enough about trying to improve the game's public perception to the point where they're working on updates still. And so that is a slight positive if you want to look at it that way. But let us know what you guys think. Are you still playing Outlaws? Have you played Outlaws yet? Are you waiting for Christmas season to play Outlaws and those big sales that are ultimately going to come? Let us know in the chat. Okay, so the last topic I think we should cover here before we get back to the chat for the last few minutes of our stream. And again, we're going to go to about an hour and a half here, probably a little shorter stream tonight, is going to be this new, supposedly leaked Seeds of Starlight Audible original novella, audio novella, that's going to be exclusive to Audible. Again, just like we had Padawan's Pride. And this time it's being written by George Mann, who is single-handedly carrying the High Republic Phase 3 right now. He has been so good, and we are working on our Tears of the Nameless review. I finished reading that book, and I was really impressed by what George Mann did there. And also, he's a veteran of audio dramas, having written Battle of Jeddah. He wrote the Battle of Jeddah audio novel or audio drama, which was very acclaimed for the High Republic Phase 2. A lot of people really enjoyed that one. I know for me, that's by far my favorite audio drama so far in the High Republic. We'll see. We have Tempest Breaker coming out in about a month, but I don't think it can top that. That was just a really, really good audio drama. and it was absolutely essential to the story of the High Republic Phase 2. And so I'm pretty excited for this. Padawan's Bride was a solid little story. This is a little bit longer. I believe Padawan's Bride was like 3.5 hours. This is 4 hours and 29 minutes, so 4.5 hours, slightly longer. I think that extra runtime could be great for padding out some of the story. But ultimately, I'm pretty excited. Uh, Narrated by Todd Haberkorn, who I believe has narrated a lot of the young adult stuff for the High Republic recently, especially the stuff from Lucasfilm Press. So, relatively seasoned narrator. This isn't a full audio drama. We're not having multiple different narrators, but it is written for the audio format. And George Mann has already done great work in the audio format. He's done great work overall in Phase 3. I'm pretty excited for this another free edition from Audible to be to added to the Star Wars library, and I'm very excited and hopeful that this is like a thing that just keeps happening forever. Like it's so nice to get these extra little free stories out of nowhere, and very impressed that we're getting two in like a month and a half.
Yeah, I don't know what to make of this kind of becoming a thing. Like Wikipedia has it listed as a Star Wars Adventures Audible Originals. That's like kind of like the series that's going on here. And we were talking about this kind of becoming, hey, this is like a starting point for like a Jedi Quest sort of thing going on here, but in canon. If it's just them jumping around with different stories, I'm very excited for that because I think the one thing that I was pretty interested by some concept art that had come out was that there's this character named Cam Linden who has like a vocodor after some sort of accident. They can't speak properly with they're just their vocal cords. And I was like, where would they show up? It's not really like comics. I don't think that's a great place of actually making use of that. We should have known it was coming in some sort form of audiobook. I figured maybe Tempest Breaker, but that's already over stuff. So, yeah, here's your great choice to have, like, the Audible original format. You get to have this character kinda have some cool effects with their voice. I think this is gonna carry on with some of the characters that we don't see in Beware the Nameless, and or the original group, at least from Escape from Valhalla, and kinda put them together with this other Padawan character. And yeah, I mean, I'm pretty excited. I don't know what exactly kind of going back into the summary is that they're gonna start seeing a lot of missing people on Irem where Starlight Beacon crashed, and then the Jedi are all there like saying, "Oh, there's more than we expected going on here, and a dangerous threat has emerged from Starlight Beacon." And we've been talking about this for a while now, and the Great Progenitor was on Starlight Beacon, wasn't it? So,
Mhm.
this is a great way to just suddenly bring in the Drengir for, like, the Padawans and the younglings to deal with, and I think this could be a pretty fun way, and just seeing maybe how it, like, changes, like, a big thing about that we see in the manga of Edge of Balance is that the Drengir kinda mutate based on their environment, like, Banshee kinda changes and shapes it. I wonder if the oceans kinda create almost like a big, crazy, like, 1800s, 1700s giant squid character that we'd see in like Moby Dick and stuff like that. So, that's what I'm thinking that they could go here with, and we could have some really fun undersea adventures, which it feels like it's always been kind of missing in Star Wars. I know we have so much space adventures, we have so much stuff going on during wars and conflicts on planets and cityscapes and all that, but other than Mon Cala slash Dak, like, that's it's really just stuff that is land or not even the air. We get some in the air, but yeah, mostly land, space, never sea. And I think this is a great chance to explore that, especially excavate a little bit more of phase one that people might have forgotten. And I think this will be pretty good. I'm pretty excited for this one. I mean, it's
Yeah,
George
I think so
Lucas.
too.
Come on.
Yeah, at this point, George Mann is the hottest writer in Star Wars right now. He's killing it in every format, whether it's junior novels, adult novels, young adult novels. He's killing it in audio, and he's done great in comics as well. He's kind of becoming our second Charles Soule, where he's being able to tackle pretty much everything. And honestly, tackled more things than Charles Soule has. I mean, Charles Soule still has a larger body of work, but Charles Soule is stuck to comics and adult novels. This guy is doing everything. And he also on top of that, has all the myths and fables stuff that is also really interesting. So he's a big Star Wars fan. He obviously embraces a lot of different avenues of Star Wars, and it's just nice to see him continue to get these cool stories. And it definitely seems like the Drengir are going to be the main villains of this, and you see the tentacles kind of on the cover. So pretty cool that we get another one of these, and hopefully we continue to get more. This is a certainly a welcome addition for sure to the Star Wars publishing release calendar. Speaking of Star Wars publishing, did drop a review today of Solo Command, the final X-Wing Wraith Squadron trilogy book. It is coinciding with an Essential Legends release today. Check that out if you haven't. The audiobook also just dropped for that. If you're looking for the first time for an unabridged audiobook for that, there are now unabridged audiobooks for the first 7 X-Wing novels. There's also an unabridged audiobook for Mercy Kill that came out a while ago. So once we finally get the last 2 for the Starfighters of Adamar and Isard's Revenge, we're going to have a complete unabridged X-Wing series, which is pretty awesome. I'm working on a review for Force Unleashed as well, still trying to finish that audiobook to give you guys a review of that. But yeah, it's been a fun time for Star Wars publishing recently. Okay, I think that's all our stories. Oh, we have one other thing I wanted to mention. We don't really have to talk about this too long, but Greg Hildebrandt passed away this week. The artist of the original Star Wars poster, the iconic blue Star Wars poster. Just such a part of the fabric of what I think about personally when I think about A New Hope, and some of that original marketing. So wanted to give out our thoughts and prayers to his family, and a shout out to him, because one of those kind of under talked about people that helped contribute to the early success of the Star Wars marketing machine as it ramped up to 1977. I don't think Star Wars would be quite as successful without the iconic art that he delivered. So very, very cool guy, and lived a cool life, and hopefully he's resting in peace.
Yeah, he lived a long life. He's part of one of those original creatives that really put Star Wars in front of people's eyes and made people go like, "Oh, this is different. This is something else that I'm kind of locked into. I'm tuned into." And yeah, salute to that incredible poster and the work that him and his brother have done. Like, yeah, I it's always sad knowing that the original trilogy are we're reaching the end in a way. Like, for a lot of we have maybe another decade or two with a lot of these originators of Star Wars, and that is the main feature of human and lifespans and humanity and the planet, right? Nothing is permanent, but at least what they leave behind is, right? And I think we'll always be able to say, "Hey, Greg made this incredible poster that people,
Yeah, absolutely.
were like, that's it. That's what we're looking for in 1977." And yeah, and or like if they saw the movie and they're like, "That's exactly how I felt watching it," right? So yeah, rest in peace. Hope his family are doing well, and yeah, it's always sad, but at least it seems that, like, anytime we lose someone from the Star Wars family, for the most part, it's like, yeah, they at least left such a indelible mark that it can't be just blown off or dusted away.
Well, back to the chat here for the last bit, and we do only have a couple more questions. So I think we're going to answer those, and if any more come in the next 10 minutes or so, we'll try to get to them. But we're going to wrap up a little earlier tonight. As anticipated, a little slower stream, everybody, tonight. Obviously, a big thing happening in the world tonight. So we're going to wrap it up a little bit earlier than our last few streams. Hour and a half used to be our standard, but we've gone a lot longer because of all the wonderful conversations we've had over the last few weeks. So look forward to that. Looking forward to that continuing here in the future. So let's wrap it up here with Critical Thinkers question. Favorite Yuzon Vong? I'd pick Gnome Honor, and honorable mentions to Savan Long La and Vua Rapung. Yeah, Gnome Honor is, to me, kind of the go-to. He is the one that when I think about the Yuzhan Vong, I think about No Manor for the most part. I'd give Savong La also an honorable mention. But also, I don't I've always liked Shadao Shai, uh, also kind of for the name as well. But Shadao Shai, was a good one. His fight with Cornhorn's cool. But yeah, those would be probably my favorites. But it's hard to go past No Honor.
Totally blanked on what was the question here being asked.
Favorite Yuuzhan Vong
I-
character.
nah, I'm not gonna even get. That's too much. That's too many characters. I mean, you could go for the warlords. You could just go for the planet, Zenoma Sakat. I think that is a pretty interesting
Mhm.
character outside of the Book Rogue planet. Ah, I don't know. I think they're better when they're not super well explored in my mind. Once they start kind of falling inwards and breaking down internally, that's when it goes like, oh, like that's not exactly what I was thinking about. That's not exactly the image that they were projecting as characters. That's where all the weaknesses and ultimately the heroes have to win. And for a story like New Jedi Order, it's kind of inevitable, but I wish there was a little bit more depth to it. But there's a lot of writing to it, so you can argue there is plenty, but I don't know. If you're asking me to pick just one or two, no, I'd just go with the freaking planet that like upends the whole thing at the end.
Back to the chat here. Critical thinker. And I think this might be our last one, just so we can. I think we're going to wrap up here right at an hour and a half. Says, why was Luke so confused that the Vong were voids in the Force when the same thing happened to Callista? And not to mention also the Isalamiri as well. I think it's just inconsistencies across legends, really, for the most part. There's just I think with New Jedi Order, the way it was written, they were anticipating a lot of new readers, and you can actually read New Jedi Order without having read other stuff. It's not the ideal way to read it because it is kind of the finale of the Bantam era, but I think they're anticipating a lot of new readers. I think they want to kind of create this mystical element around the Yuuzhan Vong. They wanted to create this element of the extraterrestrial, the unknown, the fear around the fact that they have these awesome, uncanny abilities and powers. And in doing so, they do ignore some of the lesser liked things like Callista of the Bantam era. Um, the no, I keep wanting to say the Nogri, the East Salamiri, um, are part of the Thrawn trilogy, obviously. So there is that concept, but those are creatures that block force ability, not necessarily the exact same thing as being voids in the force. So yeah, I think that's mostly it. It's kind of a reset. Callista being one of the worst parts, not the character specifically, although the character's not great, but the trilogy being one of the worst parts of the Bantam era, being one of the lesser read parts of the Bantam era, less so read than obviously X Wing, which plays the whole X Wing series, and the characters all play a huge role in the New Jedi Order, and also Thrawn, all the Zahn stuff, big roles in New Jedi Order. Some of the Kevin J. Anderson stuff, well read, New Jedi Order, but a lot of the stuff that wasn't as well read, they don't bring back as much because I think it was to kind of let newer readers get an easier grasp on the lore.
Yeah, can't add anything else to that. I mean, Del Rey was doing their own thing, and it was kind enough that they actually continued the Bantam era for the most part. But yeah, it was more of like, hey, instead of having to work so hard to create entirely new characters, here's some characters that you can kind of recap pretty quickly and bring them up to speed and give good counters to Zavong and the insane power scaling that they have, right? So yeah, I mean, I don't think anyone loves Callista. Maybe loves the concepts behind her, but um, yeah, I mean, it's pretty cool what they did bring from Bantam, and I mean, there are things that are ignored in the early Del Rey era that then eventually start feeding into Darkness Crisis and Legacy of the Force and Fate of the Jedi. Obviously, the prequels kind of coming into full force. Also forced a couple hands there and brought in some crazy new ideas that are like, well, maybe we can merge these things together, right? But yeah, it was fun. It was good.
Well, I think we're going to wrap up there. Sorry, Critical Thinker. You can bring back some of your other questions as well next week, and we'll try to get to them as soon as we can. But we're going to wrap it up at the hour and a half mark tonight, and we just hit it. So thank you so much to everybody who joined this week. Stay tuned for next week. We will be ramping up our coverage here as we get closer and closer to Skeleton Crew. It's an exciting time. We have about 4 weeks until Skeleton Crew comes out, and then we get to talk about that every week for 7 weeks. So looking forward to discussing Skeleton Crew. Hopefully there's more news coming each week as well. Kind of a weird one this week where like the major news did come out 5 days ago, so
Yeah.
not as much to talk about tonight, but hopefully every week we get more and more information towards the show and we can ramp up our coverage. Stay tuned on the channel for more Star Wars content still coming out. We have plenty of things coming out to lead up. Shorts every other day, community polls twice a day, every day, and of course videos coming out at least a couple or 1 to 2, sometimes 3 times a week, and of course live streams every single Tuesday, 7:30 p.m. Pacific time. Thank you all so much for watching our stream tonight, and we will see you all next week. Good night, everybody.